Hello, this is Carrie Barr, and this presentation is for MSL 5121. The purpose of this study was to determine if grading daily homework based on completion would affect the homework completion rates and the student attitudes in my secondary math classroom. The participants were my 6th-hour Math 1 class, which is made up of 18 students. I focused on a one-group pre-test, post-test design for this study. When setting out to start this project, I tried to find research that would support grading homework on completion. This was quite difficult as many teachers have differing views on homework and it is very opinion-based. However, Kathy Dyer wrote an article called Homework as Formative Assessment. She states that if you're grading homework, it is not a formative assessment. She shares that homework should be completed in order to give the students the feedback, and this way they can see where they made their mistakes and they're able to fix them. She focused a lot, like I said, on formative assessment, and I feel like so many times teachers say that they use homework as a formative assessment, yet they don't really alter or tweak how they teach or what they're teaching based on how the students are doing. The key is to make sure that the students know what they do and how they're doing it and what they made a mistake on before they are required to do it for a grade. Ray Dockey wrote an article called Better Grading Practices. He says that teachers assign homework for extra practice and not to evaluate the academic expertise. His belief is that if you decide to count homework in the grades, then you should give credit for effort and not for accuracy. He makes a valid point when he talks about homework and how not every student has the support and the means to do the homework at home. He says when you grade homework that is done outside of your classroom, you cannot even be sure whose work you're grading. So he says to give the credit for the effort and not necessarily for the accuracy. Finally, Susan Zielinski wrote an article called Grading Homework for Accuracy or Completion? Yes. This article focused on finding a balance between accuracy and completion. She feels like neither one is really right for homework, that you need to have a little bit of accuracy thrown in so the students care and mix it with some completion so that they get some credit for actually trying the material. For this study, my students were given a pre-study survey just to determine their attitude toward math homework. These questions ranged from how often do you do your homework and why do you do it this often, to do you feel homework helps or hinders your learning? There was no right or wrong answer, they were just short answers. Chapter 9 homework was then graded on completion, and I told my students that as long as they attempted and truly tried on every single problem, then they would get their full credit. Up until this point, I had graded all homework on accuracy, and then the students were given the ability to go back and fix and correct the problems that they had missed, and this was just due on the day of the test. I then took those completion rates from Chapter 9 and I compared them to the individual completion rates of Chapter 8 assignments, which we'll look at in just a second. Finally, at the end of this study, I gave my students a post-test survey with the same exact 6 questions just to determine if their attitudes towards homework had changed in any way. What I found was, in Chapter 9, you can see that I had at least more students who completed the homework than who didn't complete. However, there's some quite startling percents in here. You can see there's just barely over 60% on 3 of the assignments of completion. Whereas when I was grading on accuracy, I actually had a higher completion rate from my students. The completion rate when I was grading on completion was 65%, whereas when I had been grading on accuracy, we had a completion rate of 78%. Here is a nice chart where you can see these compared. it was quite startling how drastic that change was, how many more students did not complete the work. For the surveys, for the pre-study survey, the results were pretty positive. Overall, there were a couple of students who had somewhat negative responses. And when I say negative, it just not necessarily like bad, but maybe just that they didn't do their homework, or they didn't care about doing their homework, or they were lazy. And then when I did my post-study survey results, you can actually see I had more negative responses. When I calculated these, this was quite shocking to me. So we'll talk in just a second about why I think this may have been the case. I will say it was not a drastic change. In the pre-study survey, I had a pre-study survey I had 72% positive response, whereas in the post-study survey, when I was grading on completion, it was a 68% positive response. So not a drastic change, just not necessarily in the direction I was hoping for. There are some things to take away from this. I see that there's no real positive gain from grading homework solely on completion. I do want to point out that there are many factors that may have contributed to these results. For instance, there was a short time frame on these. Each chapter only had 4 homework assignments, and so it's not a huge picture of what may have happened. Also, in this short time frame, we had 1 professional development day and 2 snow days. So it was quite inconsistent for my students, and they didn't really ever get into the groove. Another area that may have played into this was the material that was covered. In Chapter 8, when I had a higher completion rate, the material was over simplifying radicals and operations with radicals, which the students tend to grasp and really enjoyed working on. Whereas in Chapter 9, the material was over data. So they had to calculate the standard deviation and mean, median, and mode of a set of data, and then they had to create histograms and box and whisker plots. So it was just a lot more cumbersome. This isn't really an excuse. I just wonder if this played into why some students did not do their homework. As I think about these results, I'm reminded of an article I read by Linda Cardemus called Why You Should Grade Homework But Not How You Think. She thinks that grading homework on completion just leads the students into being more passive about their homework. And I have to agree with this. As we were grading on completion, my students would talk about they didn't really need to know why they missed it or if they needed to count it off. I heard them say numerous times, oh, this is just graded on completion, so it doesn't really matter. Whereas when it's graded on accuracy, I had a lot more questions about how they missed it and how they could fix it so that they could get those points back in the future. Where to go from here? I plan to share these results with my math department at Washburn Rural High School. We often have discussion about how to grade homework and the correct way to do this. While I don't believe that going to completion is the answer, I would like to find a way to work in both completion and accuracy and not go solely on accuracy as well. I also would like to share these results with my students. I think they would find it interesting that their homework completion rates went down when all they had to do was attempt the problems. I would like to get their feedback on why they feel this was the case and if maybe there were some circumstances that I had not thought of. So I hope to continue this in the future and try to find a way that best works out for my students. Thank you.